Okay, I'm Rich Conradi and this is John Haslage. We're equipment technicians for Diamond Products. Today we're going to run through the WSE1621 high cycle wall saw. Basically setup, startup, cutting, and maintenance. So we're going to go ahead and show the track being mounted on the wall. So we'll go ahead and John will put it up there and basically make sure that your T-bolts are lined up with the slots on the track feet. Lift the track up, get it on the first one. Push it in. Line it up with the second one. So at this point in time, we want to turn the T-bolt 90 degrees, flip the locking lever into position. So now we've got the track up on the wall. We're going to adjust it to our cut line. So John's going to move the track over. And we'll take a tape measure and go off the nose of the foot to our cut line, 3 7/8. So we're going to move that back. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, so right there, that puts our cut line. Let me see that. So that's going to put our cut line right here. So now we're going to move the lower foot. We're in the same position, 3 7/8. That's going to be our cut line there. Going to do this snug. You don't want to over tighten it. You just want to basically tighten it into position where the foot is not going to move and change your cut line. So once that is snug, I'm going to do the bottom one. Okay, now we're going to go and we're going to hit our leveling bolts, front and rear. Basically, you wind them down until it's touching the concrete. And then you go about a quarter turn past that. And what that does is that puts 2 additional points of stability onto it. So if the wall's got a bump or a high point or something right where the track foot is mounting, that takes any play out of the system. So next we'll fold our cut guides in so we don't cut them off. Okay, so we're going to lubricate the gear rack system here. Basically just a light lubricating oil or ZEP 45, PB Blaster, any type of lubricant will work fine. And this is just so that we have, good free movement on the track of the wall saw on the track. All right, so we're going to mount the saw on the track. Basically, you want to mount the nose first, so the arm side of the carriage. And then you want to lock it in place with the travel gear so that the saw doesn't roll around. Now once those get locked in place, you'll hear a click when the handles are locked in place. And that means the saw is locked on. So the next thing you want to do is you want to grab the arm and you want to move it. If it's got movement like this, that means the carriage needs to be adjusted. It's out of adjustment. So we're going to show you carriage adjustment here. I'm going to roll around to this side. Now what you want to do is you want to unlock the Allen head bolt here and on the bottom. And then there's a 24mm wrench that's included with the kit. Now these wheels are on a cam, so these are adjustable. The fronts are not. So what you want to do is you want to basically take and loosen this. Okay, and what you want to do is spin the wheel as you're turning the adjustment. So you turn it until the wheel stops moving. So right there. And then we lock the Allen bolt in place. And then we do the bottom same way. Now what this does is this pulls the carriage in without knocking it out of alignment, because if you over tighten either one of those adjustments, you can actually pull the whole head out of alignment. So once the saw is adjusted, you grab on and you've got no movement there. So now we're going to put the motor on, because now we got the carriage adjusted. Okay, so the motor has a clip bar on the top, which mates with the clip bar on the carriage, and then the mating gear here mates with the saw, and then this is the locking mechanism here. So what we want to do is clip the top onto the mating bar on the saw carriage. So we clip that in place, and you hear it lock. Now on the back side, there are two Allen head bolts right here. Those should mate up. Now if those don't mate up, then the gears might not be positioned to where they'll mate properly. So all you do is pull the motor out at the bottom a little bit, reach in and move the gear, and then that will line it up. Okay, so at that point those are mated up. And then we take our locking lever, lock it into position, and then we'll grab the back of the motor and we'll see if there's any play there at all. Now if there's play on this locking arm, I'm going to take this loose and I'm going to pop this off. So on this locking arm, this bolt right here mates with the locking mechanism on the motor here. So if this bolt here is pushed out, somebody tried to force it into place and lock it, and this will bend. In order to adjust the bar, basically you unlock it. There's two small set screws here and here on the back side of the arm. You loosen one, tighten the other, and it will adjust the position of this bar to where it should be straight up and down with the flange here. Once you have it locked in that position, you're good. Reattach the motor. Lock it in place, and then check for movement. If you've got movement here and the gears aren't mated properly, you will thrash the gears. If you do thrash the gears, you have to replace both the inner and the outer. So both the carriage side and the motor side have to be replaced. If you replace one, you'll trash the new one. So you have to replace both. I usually will recommend a lithium grease, or any type of regular lubricating grease will work also on the gear itself, so that when they mate, there's no friction there. The whole saw can be power washed, excepting the face of the inverter itself. Everything else can be power washed, and then any of the quick connect points, so our carriage locks, our blade flange, and our motor flange, we want to hit with a nice coat of lubricating grease. And then we'll push this through here. And then on the back side there. Okay, Now we're ready to install the blade. So on the blade itself, this one has the flange already mounted to it. The 1621 is multi-directional, so you can change the direction of the blade. One thing I want to look at is the rotation of the blade. So this blade here is directional, which means the segments are tilted. And when the segments are tilted like that, or if the landings are tilted like that, that means your directional rotation is that way. Default rotation on this saw is counterclockwise. So the blade, and that's looking at the blade, so the blade is spinning this way. On the back side of the flange, there's like a horseshoe piece here. You want to keep that clean because that mates up with the saw. And if you get enough slurry on there, it won't mate up properly and you'll have problems locking the blade in place. So you want to turn that horseshoe to where it's pointing down and then spin it around and put it up on the saw. Okay, so slide it down onto the flange. Now, the way it mates up, it may or may not be locked in place, so if you rotate it a little bit and then reverse it, it should stop. At that point in time, it should be lined up. This is your adjustment here. So we'll go ahead and tighten this up. Now, if that binds up in any way, shape, or form, you do not want to force it. There's enough play on this bolt here, which is your locking bolt. There's enough play on that bolt that if this is not lined up properly and the flange is not lined up properly, this bolt can cross thread. So you should not have to put any kind of force on it. It should go in real nice and smooth and easy. Now you see that locking ring mechanism will pull in. This is a safety feature, so if you do not have the blade on the saw, the top gear is locked. So you can't start the saw. And once I have that snug, there is included a torque wrench that is set for 60 Newton meters. This is a maximum torque on this. So that 60 Newton meters, if you exceed that, you can damage the locking bolt eventually and it'll stop working, or it'll cross thread the flange, in which case you'll have to go and buy a new flange. So normally I would be using a torque wrench there, but he didn't bring a torque wrench over, so I'm just gonna.
We're not sure what we're doing next.
Okay, so we're gonna install the blade guard on the saw now. Basically what you want to do is start with the center portion. There are two guide rails on the guard, here and here, that made up to a guide here on the inside part of the flange. Center portion will mate up with the pin in the center, and then you give it a little wiggle. Those flanges on the inside right there should be flush. Once they're flush, engage the locking mechanism. It just needs to be snug. It doesn't need to be excruciatingly tight. Okay, and now we're going to put the top part on. Now OSHA requirements are that a minimum of 50% of the blade has to be covered. So at this point in time, if I'm doing a job where I'm going to be cutting up to a corner or down to a corner, then I may or may not leave one of the guards free. But keep in mind that your rotation of the blade is going to throw slurry if you don't have all the parts on the guard. The minimum is center portion and one of the outside portions. The center pin that we locked onto on the carriage has a water bypass to it. So what happens is if you do not install the guard, the water will not go out to the blade. The water will come out that center pin. So you always need to have the center portion on the guard or on the saw. Okay, so now we got the guard on the saw. So now we're gonna make our connections to the inverter. So now we're gonna hook up the main motor assembly plug. What you wanna do is you wanna check the plug itself. Make sure that there is no damage, it isn't dirty, slurried up. If there is a lot of contaminants inside there, ideally you wanna use a electrical contact cleaner. In a pinch, you can use a regular parts cleaner, but we recommend a contact cleaner for that. So we check to make sure all the pins are at the same level, that none of them are pushed back or bent or damaged in any way. And then we'll plug that into the inverter box. Now this plug only goes in one way. So if it doesn't want to go in, do not force it. You want to just turn it 90 or 180 degrees, and then we will put the locking mechanism up in place, and then we'll wiggle the plug to make sure we don't have a lot of play there. Over time, the arms of the locking mechanism will start moving out. Not a big deal. If there's a lot of play in the plug, we just want to take a pair of regular pliers and just give the locking arms a squeeze, and then try it again. We should have no more play than what's here. So there's no play here. Next will be our travel and feed. So we'll do the same thing there. We'll inspect the plug, make sure that everything looks good, no damage, and then we'll go ahead and plug that in. Lock that in place, and then we'll give that a wiggle too, and that's good. Next, we will connect up our water source. Out and in, so the bottom water is the inbound. So our water source is going to go to that. There is a short water whip that's provided. Goes from a Chicago fitting to 3/4 garden hose thread. We lock that in place, and then we'll go and we'll put our water line on to the saw. I like to put the valve on the inverter side, just so if I need to control the water, I can do it at the inverter. I don't have to walk up to the saw while it's running to make an adjustment. Can you put it at the saw? Yes. It's a preferential thing, but I like to put it at the inverter box because it's easier for me to go over there and control it there. Now we'll hook our water hose to the saw. And now that's ready to go. Now, a feature on this saw is the water bypass. So if you are running this saw off of a water tank in the middle of summer and the water is starting to get hot in the tank, you will start having overheat problems at the saw. There is a temperature sensor inside the motor and also a temperature sensor inside the inverter set to 180. If it goes beyond that, it will shut the saw off so that nothing gets damaged. If that is the case, you open up the water valve and you let the water run free through the system. Now, if that happens and you find out your water source is getting warm, and when I say warm, I mean basically over 75, 80 degrees is going to be a problem. So what you can do is there is a quick connect valve that's included in the wall saw kit that fits in this brass fitting here on the carriage, and it is controlled by this valve lever here. And what that does is that diverts water from the blade to the bypass. So you could run 100% water going to your inverter, going to your motor, but you can cut it back at the blade and run through the bypass. And that way you're running full water flow. You're going to have more cooling effect from that, but you're not dumping a ton of water out on the blade and out on the job site that has to be cleaned up. So that's your bypass. Now, you'll notice there are two other connections here on the inverter box. This one here is a no. This one here is a USB port. This is for our service techs here at the factory to hook into the computer system and run diagnostics on the inverter and on the motor itself. This here is a port for tethering. So what you have is a cord here. If you're on a airport job or a hospital job or somewhere where they do not want radio remote, you can tether the unit. If you do tether your unit, you have to take the battery out of the remote. Otherwise, it still thinks it's wireless. The other occasion that you may use the tether is if it's a large job site and there's a lot of people using other radio frequency equipment such as a Brock or other types of high frequency wall saws, and it gets any radio frequency that's close to what this one is operating at, it will shut down. So the saw can't get hijacked. The saw will not run without proper connection to the radio remote. So if that's the case, there's 5 different frequencies that are pre-programmed into the unit. You shut the remote off, wait a couple seconds, turn the remote back on, it'll select a different frequency. You can do that up to 5 times. Typically, if I do it twice and on the 3rd time it still does it, and at that point in time, I know I've got too much interference and I'm gonna go ahead and hook the tether up so that I eliminate that. When you remove any of the protective caps, always replace them. These are very, very sensitive electronics on this unit. They do not respond well to water, slurry, dirt, dust, etc., etc., etc. So as soon as I take any of these cords loose, I'm going to put the protective cap on the cord or on the inverter so that they're protected. Okay, so now we have our power supply connected. We're going to come over to the inverter box and we're going to turn our main power connector to the on position. Now when you do this, you should get a green light right next to the main on-off switch. That means you have good power input to the box. Okay, next we're going to take the remote.
All right, I'm rolling.
So we're going to take the remote, we're going to flip the protective screen cover up. You're going to go over to the right side of the remote, the main key, turn that to the on position. We'll hear the remote beep. It'll go through its startup procedure. Then it will show you a reset situation. So in the upper right corner, you'll see a red triangle. Before anything can be done with the unit, that red triangle has to go away. On the right side of the remote, we've got a blue button marked reset. We press that button, we tilt it back up, our red triangle has gone away. Now at this point in time, we are in power input mode. So before we touch any other button, we come over to the left side, the black auto button. If we press that button down on the right hand side, it'll say 32A. This is house power 32 amp. If we press the button, that'll go to 16A, which is house power 16 amp. If we press the button again, it'll go to G32A, which is generator mode 32 amp. And then if we press it again, it'll go to G16A, which is generator mode 16 amp. If we press it again, it goes back to the initial default setting, which is 32 amp house power. Now, if you forget to do the power input, and this is hooked to a generator and you're running it on house power, it is going to shut off on you at that point. If it does, then we shut the inverter off, we shut the remote off, and we do our whole startup procedure again and select generator mode on the unit. Now, if you go to a job and they say they have 480 three-phase power, 60 amp, 50 amp, whatever, over 30 amp, and you get to the job and they only have 25 amp power, then that is what you're going to use the 16 amp house power or the G16A, is in case you don't have sufficient power input to run the machine. Then you would select the lower power mode. This does not affect operation of the saw. It does not affect the way the saw is controlled, the way the blade runs, RPMs. All this does is put you at half power. So what we want to do is look at how we're going to cut. If we're cutting, say, a 12-inch wall, at full power, we may cut 2-inch initial, and then 5-inch second pass, 5-inch third pass. If we're on half power, we just cut all that in half. So we would go 2-inch first pass, and then 2-inch or 2.5-inch second pass, etc., etc., etc. Because we're running on half power, so we want to cut all our depths down. So we're not going to overload the machine. All right? So now that we've reached this point, we've selected our power. So now, in order to get operation, we're going to go to the right side of the remote, and there's a green operation button. We're going to press that green operation button. Now, you heard a click from the inverter, and then in the upper right-hand corner, you should see a green rectangle with arrows. That shows you that you have operation. Now, this has a safety mode where if you leave it without doing anything else, after approximately 30 seconds, that will go away. If it does, then we just flip it back up, hit the green button again, get our green circle back, our green rectangle back, and we're off and rolling again. So once we've reached this point, we have the green rectangle. Now we have controls. So the joystick on the right side basically controls movement on the carriage. So left and right, so side to side, is going to be travel, and then up and down is going to be feed. So left and right controls the saw moving up and down the track or side to side on the track. Up and down puts our arm and blade into or out of the cut. Now, once we hit our joystick in the direction we want to go, then the large knob on the left is our speed control. So once we have our green circle or green square, okay, then we can hold the joystick and then turn the speed control up and move the saw up or down. So go ahead and turn it up. And then other direction. So that's our travel. Now anytime I'm moving from travel to feed, I'm going to zero out the speed control, then go back and hit my joystick up or down, and then turn up the speed control to move the arm. We turn our water valve to half position on the inverter box, and then we're going to turn our water on at the remote, which is going to control the water flow to the saw, and then we'll turn our main motor on position, turn our silver motor speed control all the way up, wait until it comes up, and then we're going to go and travel the saw down to the bottom of the cut, engage the blade, do our initial pass up to the top, drop our blade back in for our second pass, third pass, etc., etc., etc.
Might gotta go back to sanding.
In a few minutes. We're almost done.
I was gonna say, 'cause it's already loud enough, I figured he could start sanding.
So that's our basic setup, adjustment, and operation of the WSE1621 Wall Saw. For more information, feel free to drop us a line. Our website, diamondproducts.com, or 800-321-5336. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.